Welcome to a mini lesson on argumentative writing. So I'm just going to teach you what argumentative writing is as an overview and how it's different from informative writing. And this is going to give you an idea of what we're going to be doing in the next week, 2 weeks with writing your argumentative essay finally. So an argumentative essay is all about taking a position. Usually a prompt is presented and you need to take a stance on that prompt. How would you answer that prompt? And then you need to spend time defending your stance with sound reasoning and evidence. Now, a lot of essays, informative, explanatory, all of them deal with this element, right? You're presenting a side of an issue or presenting something, and then you're using evidence to inform someone or to continue educating them on a certain topic. The thing that makes argumentative writing different is that you have to have a counter argument and a rebuttal. So that means that you can take a stance on an issue, but you also have to be thinking about, well, what could somebody say to disagree with me? And then you have to look at that, evaluate it, and say, okay, so they may say this, but I can prove that they are still incorrect. So you've got the counter argument. What does the opposing side say? And the rebuttal, which essentially says, this is why they're wrong. And so it's all about when you're brainstorming and you're writing, it's all about anticipating all of the opposing sides' opinions and what they're going to bring to the table to try and discount your stance. So I'll give you an example. If you're writing an essay or in a discussion with the prompt of, should couples live together before they get married? Your argument would be, what do you believe? And so for this, we're just going to say that this person believes that couples should not live together before they get married. So that would be the argument. What does the writer believe? And then you have to think about, okay, well, what's the opposite of that argument? Or what's the counter argument? How would somebody disagree with you? And that is that couples should live together before they get married. So oftentimes it's as simple as this should happen or this should not happen. So then when you're going through and you're figuring out, okay, well, if the argument is that couples should not live together before they get married, then you have to ask yourself, what is the reasoning behind that? And so you brainstorm, and here are a couple of the reasons why somebody would argue that couples should not live together. So they could say sex is a very personal act that should be saved for your spouse, so for after marriage. And if you're living together, then you're probably sleeping together too. The second point that they would make is there's little security for people who move in together to not just move out when they get bored, frustrated, or tired. The third point could be living together is an excuse to have a monogamous sex life, but shouldn't a relationship and a commitment be much more than just the physical? So that's another element, another thing that they would argue for why couples shouldn't live together before they get married. And then they say most religions of the world expressly forbid sex before marriage. So it's the idea of God and theology. Why would you go against God? So if that's what this person believes, and they've come up with all of this evidence, to be a good argumentative writer and to be informed, they now have to think of the opposite side. How would somebody challenge them, challenge their reasoning? And notice that each of these challenges are going to directly attack the evidence in order. So if the argument says that sex is a very personable act that should be saved for your spouse, then the counter argument, disagreeing with that, they could say, well, those standards are upheld from an older and much less modern time. So that would be the first counter argument. If the person who says they should not live together then says there's little security for people who move in together to not just move out when they get bored, frustrated, or tired, the counter argument, the person disagreeing, could then say, well, even when people get married, there's still potential for divorce because of frustration, boredom, or exhaustion. Marriage doesn't solve that, right? You could always still be left. Okay, so if the argument says living together is an excuse to have a monogamous sex life, but shouldn't a relationship and commitment be much more than just the physical? Then they could say, well, how else are you going to get to know whether or not you want to spend the rest of your life with somebody if you don't live with them first, right? You don't learn their habits. You don't learn if you guys actually get along or if you're in it for the long haul. And then finally, the last argument for they shouldn't live together before they're married is most religions of the world expressly forbid sex before marriage. And then the other person would argue, well, what if you're not religious? Must I be held to the same standard as you? So, as you can see, this person who's about to write an argumentative essay has just spent a decent amount of time not only formulating their argument, but also thinking about all the different ways that their argument can be challenged by the opposition. And before you begin writing any argumentative essay, this is what you have to think of, because all of these things are going to be a part of that essay. What do you believe? How is that challenged? And then the next step, which we'll do next week, is the rebuttal. Okay, so if somebody disagrees with you with a counter argument, how can you take those disagreements and still prove that they're wrong? And so now it's your turn. Spend the rest of class working on the document titled Argue With Me. I've given you instructions. There are a list of 10 prompts, 10 different questions. You need to choose from 4. What 4 prompts interest you the most? And then you're going to come up with, well, what do you believe? What are the reasonings behind what you believe? What would the opposing side say? And how would they challenge those beliefs? So you'll do that for 4 of 10 options. And then you will do the very final paragraph or the final box, which gets you to start brainstorming about your argumentative essay that you're going to start writing next week, which essentially asks and challenges the definition of what does it mean to be American? Good luck.